Welcome back, Art 166 folks, and here we are with Principles of Design 2, continuing our quest to name every principle of design there is. Okay, unity is a goal. UNITY is a goal in design. We all want our graphic elements to be interrelated and form a greater whole. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. When it's unified, all the graphic elements look as though they belong together. Fortunately, and we can use this to our advantage, and we do, this is what the brain wants. Now we're getting into human perception and how the brain works. The brain prefers order. That's why looking at this is so painful. This drives me crazy for so many reasons, which we'll probably get into at some point, but just compare how much happier your brain is looking at that than that. And you at this point, new to graphic design, probably can't even enumerate all the reasons why. You just have a reaction to it. And please, if you don't have a reaction to it, bring that to class. I think I want to know that. I'm not sure yet. So designers can exploit the brain's capacity to find and create order. In addition to helping us understand how the brain works and how it wants to seek out clear and direct communication, we can also use what we know about the brain, how it perceives things, to invent forms that are challenging and surprising and fun for the viewer. So, in other words, this is all good stuff to know. Gestalt. It is a German word, and it is a part of a series of visual relationships. It's a framework of spatial relationships that was developed in the 1920s by 3 different German psychologists. So the important part of that sentence is psychologists. So Gestalt is German for the word form. It places an emphasis on the perception of forms as organized wholes, and is concerned with how the mind attempts to impose order on the world, to unify and order perceptions. So there are 6 or 8, depending on who you are, basic Gestalt principles, and we're going to get into them now. So basically the point of all this is, if we understand how the brain works and what the human brain wants to do, we can exploit that to our advantage in our design. Because what are we doing? We are creating images to appeal to a human audience. So we have like insider knowledge into how the brain works, and we should make the best of it. So the first theory, Gestalt theory, is the theory of similarity. And this simply says we see 2 groups based on the similarity of elements. So I would challenge any of you to see this as anything other than but 3 yellow and 3 blue circles. We don't read it as 3 pairs of each color, a blue, yellow, blue, yellow, blue, yellow. We read it as the 3 blues and the 3 yellows. And ask yourself, why do we do that? They're all equally spaced. Well, actually, my yellows are dropped down a little bit, but you would still read it that way because of the theory of similarity. We lump similar things together. There's different ways to create similarity. First one is with shape, similarity of shape. Now, we just saw similarity of color. This is shape. We also can do similarity of size. When we look at those, we're going to lump them into small circles and larger circles. This one is color. And when I say we do, if you have disagreements with this with me, write them down and let's talk about them in the next class. That's one of the disadvantages of doing the class remotely and relying on videos, because sometimes I have to sort of assume things and you don't have a chance to ask questions or challenge me to ask more of the whys. So I don't want to lose out on the whys. It's one of the reasons I do a little review session in the following class in case there's some giant whys. So anyhow, we talked about shape, size, and also color. And for whatever reason, I decided to repeat that slide. All right, and moving on. The next theory is the theory of proximity. This says that objects that are close to one another will be grouped together, that we will visually group them together. So I would also say that I'm sure we all see this as two sets of 2, vertical, a top and a bottom on each one. We don't read it horizontally. We do it as the 2 groups that are stacked, almost 2 letter 8s almost. Our brain reads them as 2 separate things because of their proximity to one another. We see that here. We see these as three distinct groups because each group is closer. The elements in the first three, next three are all closer to each other, so it creates three groups. Then even within them, if you look at the first group, you lump the second two vertical lines together because they're closer to one another. This is something that if you become a web designer, this becomes very important, this sort of thing. You'll just do this innately, but it's good to point it out. So, okay, that gets my point. Who cares? Oh, look at that. If you're designing a computer keyboard or perhaps a website, something that contains a lot of elements, then you want to organize those elements in as intuitive a way as possible. And by intuitive, that just basically means in the natural way that the brain wants to work. And all these theories of Gestalt are based on how the brain wants to work. So hopefully I've made that abundantly clear. Yeah, basically that's what I just said. This uses theories of proximity and similarity. So things that are closer to each other are more related, and probably more proximity than similarity. For example, I don't know. I don't know enough about the keyboard. I'm not sure if the yellow keys, the background, and the mix are somehow related to each other. And maybe everything that's like danger zone, like the red, maybe red always says that. But I'd have to know more about the keyboard. But I know for sure that the things that are close to each other are related. I mean, interfaces like we have on Amazon do not happen by accident. These are studied. They're based on how the brain works. You've heard of the user experience, website, UX, UI. There's a lot that goes into how we see things. We talked about similarity and proximity. Okay, well, so on the left, the list of things are all closer to one another. So we read that as one menu, as one group. They're also similar in size. So we read them all together as one group, and we don't connect them with, say, the middle section where we see the words "be inspired" and "come together with Georgia," whoever. We read that as a separate thing because it's in not only a different place, proximity, but it's also a different size, a different style. So they're using all these ways of seeing to organize information. And a lot of being a designer is organizing information. Through similarity of color, add to the cart by now on the lower right, those are the two actions that Amazon wants you to do. So those are cued to the same color. So we know those are related in some way. The streaming, MP3, audio, CD, vinyl, all those are the different ways. They're all pretty equivalent. They're different ways that you can choose to get to this cast recording. So we know that they're similar to each other because they're all the same shape, and they're all in a line, and they're close to one another. And on and on. The next theory of Gestalt is simplicity. Not that you care, but the word Pragnanz, Pragnanz, is a German word meaning good figure. And the law of Pragnanz is sometimes referred to as the law of good figure and the law of simplicity. I know, blah, blah, blah. So this law holds that our brain wants to reduce reality to the simplest form possible. So we want to see what's on the right, three combined squares, rather than the intricacy of the various overlapping lines on the one on the left. Not that the one on the left is all that complicated, but the one on the right is easier. Our brains do not want, this is like an evolutionary thing, it's one of the reasons humans have survived as long as we have. Our brains don't want to work any harder than they have to. That's not about being lazy, it's about survival, because you want to save your brain power for things that you need it for, like to stay alive and not get eaten by a dinosaur or whatever. You don't want to waste it on useless things. Okay, the next theory of Gestalt is the theory of closure, and this is we close that gap with our minds. If we present that to somebody, they will see they will close that gap. I mean, because it looks like a letter C, I might not close the gap and keep it as a letter C, but if we're just looking at it as a circle, the mind will close that up. So two good examples. We sort of more or less create where the man's face is, where Elvis's face is on the right. And on the left, we connect all those different lines together. in typorama. Those lines aren't connected, but we bridge those gaps because we want it to be closed. We want it to make sense. We want order. Now, continuity is the next Gestalt law or theory, and we like things to form a predictable pattern. So separate objects that look like they're joined, we read them as joined even if they're not, like this, like this. That's why we see this as a sort of narrative sequence with the bug at the upper right moving down the page and dying, sleeping, whatever. We see it as almost just a continuation, like a slow motion. All right. Our old friends, positive and negative space. This is one of the other theories of Gestalt, but we've already talked about this at length in our last class, so I'm just going to move on. Skipping. Symmetry, another theory of Gestalt, which we also have covered last class. Skipping. You don't see this one as much, but the Gestalt law of common fate basically says that when a series of objects move at the same speed in the same direction, we read that as part of a single stimulus. We assume that they belong in a group together. So because they're all in a formation going in the same direction, we just assume that, which, take it for what it is. Okay, well, there's a photographic example of what I'm talking about. We just assume all those planes are going in the same direction.